Hi girlies, welcome back to the Thriving Teens podcast. Today we're going to talk about how to stop the cycle of fighting with your parents and to take your energy back. I think that this podcast topic is so important. I don't think it's talked about enough, especially from like teenage influencers or whatever, because we all have our parents and conflict is inevitable. I think growing up, I never really thought I would be that classic angsty teen that you see in movies that's fighting with their parents. And I remember growing up seeing my sister and my parents beef sometimes because my sister would just go to sleep really late at night. So she would get into fights with them like every single night. And I was just like, that's not me, you know? Because I feel like I've always been praised once I started getting on my self-development journey of like waking up early in the morning. And I think my parents think I'm generally put together. But let me just tell you, in the last few months, my parents and I have definitely had to go through a lot together. And it's been difficult, but I think just coming out of it and just understanding each other better, I am really grateful for the challenges that we faced in our relationship because I think it's made me a lot stronger. And I want to share with you guys all the lessons I've learned with having healthy relationships with our parents. And I also want to put a disclaimer that I'm talking about my personal experience with parents that don't always understand me but genuinely want the best for me. So I have no experience with genuinely antagonistic parents. So I'm speaking about generally healthy parents, okay? So that is the scope of this podcast today. Over the last few months, I've definitely gotten a lot of interesting opportunities that my parents didn't always let me take, and it definitely made me start feeling like we were on opposing teams and that they were like working against me, and it just was difficult for me to like grasp. And I found myself just fanning a lot of flames to fires that were going on. And it was just consuming me so much. I definitely noticed that I had a very like fight or flight response to arguments. And guys, I just want to validate, it is hard. It is hard if a parent is making a statement or something that feels like an accusation towards you. It is hard to keep your cool. Like I would find myself literally trying to give TED Talks and like showing receipts of stuff to like convince my parents that their opinion was wrong. But I think what I've learned is that we all have our own perception. A lot of times perception trumps reality. And it's not a good argument tactic to tell your parent your reality is wrong. Like your perception of being like you're wrong, like you're seeing things wrong. Because then their mind just starts to get closed off and they're going to keep on arguing their point. You're going to keep arguing your point. So I think the issue before is I feel like Gen Z is always like, validate your feelings, but sometimes we forget to validate our parents' feelings. So I noticed that my parents have a different perception of me than I have of my own. It doesn't make theirs any less valid. It's just that I don't always agree with it. So I think now my approach is trying to understand where are they coming from and understanding that our parents are human. They have certain traumatic events they've gone through, certain frameworks that they grew up living with. And I think a lot more has risen to the surface in terms of like areas of tension with my parents and I, especially as I'm starting to grow older, where I think being a teenager is such an interesting stage of life because I know some parents, especially conservative parents, really don't like this, but I am just going to say reality as it is, that Gen Z is starting to be parented by a lot of different sources. Like for most of us, our parents are no longer like our sole and primary source of advice, of guidance. Like we got TikTok. And I'm not here to make morality statements, if that's good or if that's bad, but I'm just saying that now Gen Z has kind of multiple sources of parenting that it becomes difficult to see where our parents fit into that puzzle. And I can totally understand from like the parents' perspective how when your teenager is starting to grow up into their own person, it feels like you're losing someone or like you feel like you're losing some sort of control and normalcy. And I like reading a lot of books about parenting, which makes it weird because sometimes I'm like logically, like I understand my parents' perspective, but still physically in my body, I feel frustrated and like a little angsty teenager. So sometimes you can understand logically what your parents are going through, but it is totally okay in your body to feel frustrated, to feel mad, to want to throw a tantrum. But girl, we gotta have some self-control, because the biggest thing I've been learning recently is that you can shut down arguments like this if you choose not to feed into the energy that is being thrown at you. Because if I would get like maybe an accusation or like a you don't care enough about this or you don't care about your future, any statements like that, again, I would go out into like pulling receipts up mode. Like I need to defend myself. And I no longer feel the need to defend myself. A lot of the times if someone will make an accusation, I'll literally be like, yeah, you're right, and just move on. Like I'm not even kidding. It can be just as easy as that. I remember there was one defining moment with one of my parents where I was, getting judged, or not judged. She was just calling out that I do not take care of the dog enough. And that is true. That is a weakness and flaw of mine. And I used to be so defensive and not even wanting to admit that I was wrong, that I would just start being like defending myself and just being like, I walked him yesterday, XYZ. But this time I was like, let me change my approach. And I started like crying. And I was like, I know, like, I don't take care of Charlie enough. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I've treated like him not well enough. Like, I'm such a bad dog parent. And I completely just let myself be sorry. And be like, I'm totally wrong. I think especially like in Asian American households, sometimes crying isn't normal. Like, full vulnerability isn't normal. And my parent didn't know how to respond. Like, they literally just stopped talking. So in that way, the conversation was cut short. I'm just trying to save you guys energy because I've been in circumstances where I've had an hour-long argument just trying to prove my point, and I would be addicted to chaos. I don't think we understand, but sometimes we get addicted to suffering, where chaos is normal and it's comfortable. And our response to chaos becomes a cycle. And that's why I'm saying, like, let's get out of this cycle, right? Take your power and energy back. Where we'd have these hour-long conversations where both sides, are arguing their point, not seeking to understand, but just arguing. And I honestly think this conversation about parents can really tie into understanding people from different political spectrums, because that's sometimes what it can feel like. There is intergenerational conflict where we've grown up maybe in different environments, especially as a child of immigrants. We did grow up in a different circumstance. So our opinions on the world, how it works, and what is desirable is different. So I would definitely say this can also be applicable to just understanding people that have different opinions. But we'd have this hour-long conversation, and I feel like it never really made progress. And I, for so long, wanted to control what my parents thought, how they treated me, and I think the problem with this is that I interpreted content about parenting incorrectly. So growing up in church, I would hear a lot of sermons directed towards parents or just families on how they can, create a healthy family, like parent their children better. And I consume this content, I'm like, okay, so I'm not a parent, so I can't directly apply this content. So my idea was like, let me teach my parents how to parent me. Or like, gently, I can't even speak. Gentle parenting on TikTok. Like, I'd be that type of person that watched that stuff and be like, let me educate my parents. And I don't think I understood that. I don't think someone's 16-year-old daughter is going to be like the reason why like they change, or like we all have our own personal development journeys, and it needs to come from an internal place, where a lot of the times my parents see progress in their lives when they get inspired by a friend. And I'm not saying that you can't influence your parents' lives. I'm sure there are exceptions to this. I do think that I influence my parents' lives, but not drastically, really. Like, I think once you accept that there is an inherent power dynamic, and it's so much easier to just control your half of the relationship instead of trying to control someone else, that can be really helpful. And I think that I would just consume these sermons, these contents about parenting, and I started to interpret in a negative way of like, oh, I can't be satisfied and happy in my relationship with my parents until it's like at this perfect level, that I couldn't even see the things that I appreciated about our relationship. And I think now I'm really starting to figure out what I love about my parents and really appreciate. They're so invested in my education, sometimes to the point where I feel that it's overwhelming, where I'm like, stop talking to me about college. Stop signing up for virtual tours for me. But then I realize some people have parents that don't want to put in the time to help them with their education or to help them prepare for college. So like, I am so grateful, that my parents care enough to spend their own time help me prepare for college. So that was kind of a paradigm shift for me. But when I was in that mode of I need to teach my parents how to parent, I know the answers, it never made me happy because I could never truly have meaningful influence over them. And I was just investing so much energy in a place that just had no returns. So I'm not trying to tell you guys to settle or to be complacent, but a lot of the times it's easier, and I think it's more peaceful and effective and genuine at the end of the day to just accept people for who they are and to accept the beauties of a relationship. And the thing is, our relationship with our parents is kind of different than the relationships with a partner. Like, I think that you have more flexibility over, like, oh, you're looking for all these things in a romantic partner. It's like, don't settle for less. But we can't mold our parents into the picture perfect parent we want. And I think when we focus more on figuring out our own triggers and our responses, with a lot of times I don't respond as well as I would like to my parents, So instead of focusing on their end of the argument, like what they said, it's better to focus on how I could have handled it better. And it doesn't mean that you invalidate your feelings. Like, when I get my feelings hurt in an argument, I will text my friends and be like, oh, this like really hurt me. Like, can we kind of get through it and heal through it together? Like, I do need some comfort right now. So it's not like I just push it under the rug and I'm like, oh, what they said wasn't wrong. I need to focus on what I said. Like, yes, I'm like, okay, what they said wasn't ideal. Like, I would probably refrain from saying that to my child. But I accept that sometimes you just need to become a translator. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes our parents genuinely care about us, but they just don't know how to communicate that in a way that resonates with Gen Z. So before I used to be like, okay, learn how to speak my language, right? Like, learn how to love me in my love language. Reading all these relationship books. And yes, I'd be ideal. Like, I really appreciate it. Like, my mom actually reads like those 5 love language books. So I think she is more aware and cognizant of that. But I used to, I don't know, feel like, love me in my love language. But I realize what's actually in my control is I can translate the way that my parents love me. Like, so let's say I don't receive love that highly from acts of service. And acts of service, let's say that's like my parent folding laundry for me. Like, just being aware of that's how they show love, I then like need to consciously convert that to, oh, that means that they love me. Or let's say my parent is like, you need to focus more on college. To me, that sounds like an attack. But I've learned to convert that into, oh, that means they love me. But the thing is, I need to consciously do that because to my Gen Z brain, that does not feel like love. I know to some of you guys, you might be like, you're delusional, like you're making like love out of something that isn't actually there. But what is the other option, Like, I think we need to learn how to like cater around to our parents, just because I do think that as people grow older too, they are less likely to change and evolve. And this is no hate to older people, but I do think that I have talked to some older people that are just like very, very set in their ways and beliefs. And maybe it's just because they have experienced so much of life and they're like, this is genuinely the answer and the truth. But I really do hope that once I'm older, I'm still like very open-minded and constantly exploring and evolving and like changing myself. But I think that we ourselves are so much more moldable. And I think you can learn so much through figuring out how to adapt and understand your family members. And I think something that's helped me too is to just speak less and observe more. So what I mean by this is, instead of like always contributing to a family conversation or something, because sometimes I can overpower a family conversation, and I've been told that by my family members, is just stop talking and to actually observe, like, how do my family members interact with other people? Like, how do my family members interact with each other? How do they interact with people in public? Like, sometimes I'll just watch my parents, like, talking to other people in public. I'm not trying to, like, overanalyze them, but it helps me understand them more. Helps me understand how they interact with me too. So I think seeking to understand is really cool, because even if you feel like in pain from your arguments with your parents, you can at least see it as a learning experience, because I see it as you're building emotional resilience. where you're figuring out how to still thrive in a relationship that you can't always control. This is also how I view high school, because I don't have a ton of autonomy about where I go to high school, the classes that I'm taking in high school, but I'm figuring out how to enjoy it, right? Like with family relationships, you don't have that much autonomy compared to maybe romantic relationships or friendships, but by learning to still appreciate it, and I'm talking about healthy parents, okay? Like if you were in an unhealthy situation, I would take a different route, but I'm just not equipped to share resources on how to take a different route in a relationship with parents that may be genuinely harmful to your safety and well-being. But I want to talk to you guys more on the topic of the idea of feeling like you're on opposite teams with your parents and just recent experience that I had and like what I learned from them. And so for instance, I got this internship over the summer. That is my dream internship. And I'm going to make an episode, I think, about how I got my dream internship, but I was just really excited for this internship. I would stay up late at night figuring out how am I going to pitch my value to this company. I was really excited for it, and I ended up getting the offer, and the company wanted me to relocate to LA for 10 weeks. And I was really excited about that because I'm like, yes, let's get out of our comfort zone. Let's live in LA for 10 weeks. Let's experience maybe a glimpse of what college could feel like, living away from home. But they were like, okay, we're not going to let our 16-year-old daughter live out in LA. And like, that was understandable to me. Like, I can understand like that logic. But again, it still felt frustrating, right? Like in my body, it felt frustrating. Like outside of, the logic in my head. Because I'm like, this is like a dream of mine. And the only thing holding me back is like my parents' approval. So that was really difficult for me to just handle. And I had some outside voices of some people were saying like, oh, I totally understand what your parents were saying. And then some people were being like, oh my gosh, like they just don't understand. Like they're holding you back. You need to do something. Like you need to fight. Like you need to make them change their mind. And this is just, it was so exhausting for me. Because when they wouldn't say yes to an opportunity to travel or do something, it would make me feel like, oh my gosh, like this is my fault. I'm not pitching it hard enough. I'm not giving them the smart reasons. I'm not being clever enough. Like I'm not working hard enough. And then I think it really helped me understand that there are certain situations or certain beliefs that our parents have that are very hard to change. And it's not your fault if they say no. Because I think I waste so much energy just trying to like convince and having so many conversations. And it's like you understand your parents best ultimately. So I think, again, just coming out from that place of acceptance and understanding rather than trying to change something that is like relatively, set in stone is really important. And I think just coming out of that experience, I'm still doing the internship, but I'll be doing 9 weeks remote and then 1 week in person in LA, and my family is coming with me. So that was a compromise that we made that I do really appreciate, and I think just coming out of that, I do understand my parents better, even though it was uncomfortable in the situation. I do know that they want the best for me, even when just our views of it are different, and I think what's really helped me recently take in my parents' advice in a more helpful way, because I think I talked to this with a lot of my friends, especially my like Asian American friends too, where a lot of the times our parents would be like, you need to study harder, you need to focus on college more, you need to XYZ. To us, it makes us feel like a piece of crap, or like that you're lazy, you're not really doing anything. But when I take into context of what their best vision for me is, which is achieving a lot in higher education, it makes sense to me, why they say those certain things, and I just don't really argue with it anymore, because I was also thinking for myself, like, what is my vision for my life 5 years from now, and what do I think my parents' vision for my life is 5 years from now? And I realized that they were kind of pretty different, like what we either one of us wanted. Made me realize we are on the same team, like we all want the best for me, but the physical manifestation of what that looks like is just different. So, when my parents give me advice, I do take it into account, because I had made mistakes in the past, just being like, I'm not going to listen to my parents, and I definitely could have saved literally thousands of dollars if I had listened to my parents about certain things. But, that being said, after hurting a lot from not listening to my parents, like at all, I kind of started to go on the opposite side of the spectrum, where I would take their advice as like gospel for things. And I noticed that their advice was starting to like really like be in my head a lot, where just even subconsciously sometimes I would think like, oh, I'm about to do something that they're not going to be very happy with. So then I would try to like do all these like good deeds leading up to when I would do something that they wouldn't be happy with, because I wanted to like game a point system. I don't know. So literally there have been times I've been more self-aware of this now. Like, am I really doing this for myself, or am I doing it for my parents, like in a negative way? And I think this also can really influence your relationship with God. If you're a Christian, your like relationship with your parents, where I would notice like even with God, a lot of times I would be trying to like work for his love and stuff and view that as a point system. So I've definitely had to be more aware of that. But now I think that this is how I interpret advice from my parents, is that it is significant. It does have weight in it, but I view it with the whole context and picture in mind, okay? So for instance, like my parents, they both grew up in China, and they're pretty sustainable when it comes to their clothing. Like they wear their clothing pretty consistently, like literally like over a decade. And they would like for me to be pretty similar to that, like, oh, don't buy like a lot of new clothes or change up your closet a lot. But then I do think about the future that I want. I want to be able to experiment with my fashion. Like, I personally find it fun to experiment with fashion, and that is something that I'm excited to do more. And also my camera is about to die, so I'm going to keep this podcast recording, but the rest of the YouTube video, I'll probably just put like a colored screen over it. So we're just going to keep on recording until my camera dies. But realizing that their vision is totally valid and my vision is totally valid too. But I think we need to understand, as children, you can honor your parents without directly obeying everything that they say. Because at the end of the day, their life is theirs, our life is ours, right? They have a responsibility as parents to take care of their children, but at the end of the day, they are their own human being, and we are our own human being too. Trying to make your parent into this gentle parent or like control their parenting style, like, we just can't control who each of us are as individuals. But we can come together, we can love each other well, we can try to coexist peacefully, but we don't need to try to control each other. Because I noticed when I was doing things like out of trying to seek approval from my parents, I realized like I'm in a stage of my life where a lot of the things I do actually impact my future. I was realizing I was like starting to like build a future like for them. And I'm like, that is so dangerous. Because they're them, I am me. Like, we were put together in this lifetime for a reason. We have like a soul contract. But it's not our identity. Do you guys know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I want my parents to do what makes them happy. And I will do what makes me happy. And we will support each other in the process. But we just cannot be so attached to each other's approval, because I think on both ends that can become really unhealthy. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit about realizing our individuality as children and parents. And I also want to talk about implementing humor in your relationship with your parents. I think that this is, I don't know if this works for every relationship, but this is what I've been doing recently. Is that sometimes if I get in a fight with my mom, like I'll literally just make it a joke. Or if I'm feeling some type of pressure about preparing for college, I'll be like, oh, like, thank you so much that you're so obsessed with me, that like you send me all these resources about college. I know for some of you guys, you might not like that, but it's just a running joke between us. So I think sometimes making your fight into a joke and just like romanticizing it almost, I don't know if it works for everyone, right? But I think that that is something that brings me more joy and makes me realize like, at the end of the day, we do love each other, and it's just kind of funny that we're experiencing this fight. And I do think that the best version of us really tries to seek peace with our parents, because I was thinking about like, what does the best version of me act like, look like? And I'm like, the best version of me is not beefing with their parents, and that is something that I am working on, and it's really important to me. I also think, I'm like, what would a dark force in this world want for my life? And I think what they would want is for me to fight with my parents and for us to have discourse all the time. So it's like none of us want to fight. Like, I think that's another important thing, is that like mentally healthy parents like do not want to fight with you. They don't want to make you feel bad, but it's just like sometimes we're all just emotionally out of control and just crazy human beings, so shit hits the fan. But no one wants, like, at least in my relationship with my parents, we don't want chaos. It's just that sometimes we're at the whims to our emotions, and we need to be in emotional control and work on our emotional intelligence so that we don't hurt each other. And I think that is kind of the moral of this episode, that even when it feels like you're in opposing teams with your parents or that you're being attacked, they don't want to attack you. It's just that we struggle to understand each other. And I think it's best to focus on our side of the relationship instead of trying to control them as parents, because that's ultimately where we're going to see the most personal growth and also find the most internal peace. So that is all I have for you guys in this episode. I really hope it was helpful. This is a topic that is dear to my heart. If you guys have any follow-up questions or any thoughts on this episode, you should definitely Instagram DM me at AnnieLongYT. I hope you all enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.